reading here will be in Judges chapter 8, and please have a Bible with you.
Sit down, rock the plate.
Right. We'll go ahead and get started. We're in Judges chapter 8, verse 22. So what we have here is last time, Gideon went out, he drove the people out of his land who had invaded the Midianites, and then he takes the campaign across the Jordan River, clears up the Israelite lands that we'd see here that's labeled as Gad, but is usually called Gilead, and then he goes even further and he attacks them from their home camp and base. So really just sort of striking out the threat. And this is sort of unique because not often do we see the Israelites leaving the land of Israel to do military action like this in this time period. It's not until you get to like more King David where they're doing some small, and even then they don't go far outside of their boundaries. They're much more of a defensive force than they are an offensive force. We have Gideon punishes some of the cities who don't help him out rather brutally. And then what happens is they're taking all these riches from these Midianites who have been traveling around, raiding and stealing from the people. And so now they have money from doing all this. So let's go ahead and hear what happens next. And we'll read Judges 8, verse 22 through 28. And do I have a volunteer to read? Judges 8, 22 through 28. In the back, please.
Gideon's ephod. The Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us out of the hand of Midian." But Gideon told them, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." And he said, "I do have one request, that each of you give me an earring from your share of the plunder." It was the custom of the Ishmaelites to wear gold earrings. They answered, "We'll be glad to give them." So they spread out a garment, and each man threw a ring from his plunder onto it. The weight of the gold rings he asked for came to 1,700 shekels, not counting the ornaments, the pendants, and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, or the chains that were on their camels' necks. Gideon made the gold into an ephod, which he placed on Ophrah, his town. All Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. You're going to read 28, you said?
Yes, please.
Thus Midian was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise its head again. During Gideon's lifetime, the land enjoyed peace for 40 years.
Okay. So first off, we have him saying, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson." So in other words, set up a hereditary kingship right here and now. Now, are the people of Israel allowed to have a king? Well, okay, let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 17 here. Because there's the answer for that. Because that's the thing, is I thought the answer was no too. And I read this part of Deuteronomy and I went, oh, wait a minute. Okay, so let's read what it says. Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 14 through 20. Alright, so this is a chapter section for Deuteronomy. Again, a volunteer to read. There are no weird names in this part, so if you're not that's actually like a big sort of plus here if you want to read here. Dorcas, we need to save you for the really difficult reading, so that you know.
When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over you, like all the nations that are around you. You may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you, who is not your brother, Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, but cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses. Since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart run away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law, approved by the Levitical priests. And it shall be with him, and he shall read in it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment, either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in this kingdom, he and his children in Israel.
Okay, so yeah, because that's the thing, is in Sunday school, I learned that part where Israel asks for a king, and they get Saul, and Samuel tells them, you don't really want a king, and God says it's a rejection of me, so it's like, oh, hey, God said no kings. And then you read this, and it says, no, actually, you can have a king, but here's how you do the king. And so, yeah, there's a big but there, and that's like, oh, no, scratch that. There's a big condition here. Hi, YouTube, like and subscribe for more content. Anyway, so they say it, and this is the language they use. Set a king over us so we can be like the nations that are around us. Because everyone around them has kings. Now, a lot of these kings would just be like kings of a single city. They wouldn't be like kings of an entire kingdom or an empire. So do remember that about these kingships. They're not all that grand. Some of them are glorified mayors. What it has to be, it says among your brothers. It cannot be a foreigner. It can't be an invader. It has to be one of the people of Israel. Why that? Why does it have to be one of the Israelites? Yeah, one of their own, exactly. It has to be somebody who stands for your country. It has to be somebody who has that heritage, has that tradition, has been brought up in that way. In the United States, can we elect somebody who lives in a different country and is not a citizen here? Why not? I think that'd be a great idea, wouldn't it? No, it would be a terrible idea because we want someone who's invested in it as well. So no conquerors, no people like, oh, that person's rich, let's bring them in, they can be the king. The second thing that they say is they can't go back to Egypt, because if you remember in Deuteronomy, they keep wanting to go back to Egypt, back to the good life of slavery and oppression. And they do. They're like, we ate melons there. It's like, yeah, great, we also were slaves. Anyway, grass is always greener on the other side. To acquire horses for yourself, they're specifically forbidden from that. It's notable even in the time of Judges, their neighbors have horses. They don't have horses yet. That'll come later. And they are not to, the king shall not acquire many wives for himself. How do the kings do with that? Terribly. Okay. He shall not get excessive silver and gold. Like, how'd they do on that one? Terribly again. How about writing a book of law for themselves and studying it? Yeah, terrible again. And it's more the exceptions who do well in this thing. But by and large, they just live like the other kings around them. So we'll see that the kingship, they don't follow God's commands, and things don't go well for them. Especially if you read through 1st and 2nd Kings, the kings of Israel, the northern kingdom, are far worse than the kings of Judah. And it's like, why even bother have these guys? They're just terrible. Anyway, go ahead.
I'm only curious. The horses, why specifically horses? Was that just like as a symbol of great wealth? They didn't want the king to be so worried about accumulating wealth, or was there something about horses in particular that was bad?
So in this passage, I think the first thing is not to be going to Egypt and making alliances with Egypt to get the horses, because you need to go to a region that the horses come from. And so that's the thing, by the time you get to like David and Solomon particularly, it's mentioning he has the trade networks available finally to acquire horses and chariots.
So you can't get horses without...
You need a way to start that whole program up. And so Israel does not have it. So that's why we have, for example, we'll read about one of the judges, depending how quickly this goes, where we'll read about a horse where they're all traveling on donkeys, and that's as good as it gets in Israel at that time. So yeah, I think it has to do with the dependence on foreign powers for the goods and equipment, because they're not naturally horse people. They have to get them from somewhere else. That's my understanding of that section from what I've read on it. But yeah, it's also, and the wealth aspect is obvious. So the king's not supposed to exalt himself over his brothers, but understand he is just one among the many. The king's job, as Jesus would say, is to serve. And that's one of the things. It's one of those ideas of servant leadership. The king should serve his people, not the other way around. Man, that sounds very American, doesn't it? Except for the whole kingship part. But the idea that our leaders are there to serve us, not the other way around. Love it. So Gideon is asked to be king. The people of Israel are allowed to do this. But Gideon refuses it, saying, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. Way to go, Gideon. Knocks it out of the park on that one. Yeah, way to go, guy. But the question is, why do the people want a king? We have that they're covetous or envious of the other nations around them. Are there any other reasons you really need a king? Is it because they love paying taxes and want to pay more, that's why they need a king? What's the whole point of this kingship, other than the covetousness of another nation? Leadership, especially in war. Because that is somebody to defend you. Remember, they have just gone through years of oppression under Midian. This guy comes in, is the mighty warrior who delivers them, and they're saying, let's put this guy in charge so we have that safety and security again. And that makes sense to me. Because I could understand having a president I don't like and disagree with his policies, but if he keeps us safe and secure, you can give him a bit of a pass. If I have a mayor who I don't like what they're doing, I don't like who they are, I don't like their policies, but if they make the cities, streets safe and secure, I don't know. I kind of like, that's a big important part of what they do. Same thing with the king. The very fact that your borders are protected and people will not invade you is a huge deal. Even just the threat of a strong king makes a big difference. If your first goal is security and safety, that's what you need as a king.
If I had a king, I wouldn't have to worry about somebody giving me a bell.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is despite the fact that, but the problem with this, saying that we need the king for safety and defense, is of course they're not supposed to rely on kings. As it says in the Psalm, put not your trust in princes, but rather God is the one who's protecting them. And if the story of Gideon made anything clear, it wasn't Gideon as much as it was God. Yeah, God used Gideon, but God is the one who's protecting them. So they don't need the king. So Gideon gets it right, and then proceeds by doing the most Gideon thing possible. He gets it wrong. So what he does is he asks for everyone to give me the earring from his spoil, and saying it was the tradition of the Ishmaelites. I mentioned this before, but Ishmaelites and Midianites, they use the names interchangeably, even though they're not the same group of people. It's very confusing. I'm sorry about it. I can't fix it. So they spread out a cloak, and they all throw an earring into the spoil, and it says it wore 1,700 shekels. Shekels, we don't have a definite weight on what this would be, because shekels change based on time period. Again, I can't fix that problem. Sorry about it.
43 pounds, Pastor.
43 is what they do it, and the thing is, it's somewhere between 40 and 75 pounds, depending on what shekel they're using here. So it's a lot. That's the sort of thing. Has anyone ever had 40 pounds of gold? Yeah, I mean, that's just sort of cool. That's like the gold bars, that's Scrooge McDuck. I'd be really excited about that. So what happened is that mentioned all the other things they got. And notice how rich the Midianites are, that they have special collars around their camels. Oh man, that's so cool. You know, it's one of those things where you see like on the internet that some celebrity has like their little poodle and they have a diamond-studded collar, and you just want to throw something at your screen when you see that. It's that kind of needless wealth that they're using there. But he makes an ephod, and that's not a word that we use often. But what an ephod was, it was something that you'd wear over the chest like this. And an ephod, specifically for the people of Israel, was worn by the priest. So the priest would come out with the ephod, and it would have special jewels set into it, and that is what the priest would wear. Yeah, so they would come out, and that would be a symbol of the priest. So he's like, I'm going to make my own ephod now. Ooh. So he's saying, I'm going to make my own version of the priestly garment. You see the problem here. And so what they do is he makes it, and it's splendid. And, maybe it's even more valuable than the one that they're using in the tabernacle at Shiloh. And it says, all Israel whored after it there, or prostituted itself. Now, if you're willing to go back to week 1 of this Bible study, we talked about this language, the connection between idolatry and adultery. How God is a faithful husband to the people of Israel, and when they're unfaithful by worshiping other gods, he uses a language of marital unfaithfulness. So that whoring, that adultery, that prostitution after that. So the people, instead of going to worship God at Shiloh, where the tabernacle was in the Ark of the Covenant, and the priests are, which is like right here, instead they went to his city, which would have been up north of Shechem, and they would have gone there instead, and they're worshiping in the house of Gideon, and not worshiping God. Yeah, so it becomes a snare to the house of Gideon. But they do have peace for 40 years. So this is the first judge where you kind of have this mixed message at the ending here. Where, yeah, the land is saved, and they have peace from enemies, but at the same time they're mixing in the idolatry with the true worship of God. Not a good thing.
It's part of the cycle.
Yeah? What?
It's just part of the cycle.
It's part of the cycle, yes, I still have it here. Somebody wrote math problems on here. It's on markers. Anyway, here we go. Yeah, so Israel strayed from the Lord, much quicker than they have in the past. Things are cycling down. As I said, the book of Judges is a downward slope. Samson is rock bottom and probably dug himself a few feet underground. So we're headed down, guys. It's not going to get better. Any questions on this section here? Okay, let's read about the death of Gideon, and then we get to talk about one of Gideon's sons, Abimelech. And remember how Gideon said that my son shall not become king? Well, wait till you find Abimelech. He disagrees. All right, let's read about the death of Gideon, verses 29 through 35. And a volunteer to read. I see Nancy right there. Right there, Larry.
Thus Midian was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise its head again. During Gideon's lifetime, the land enjoyed peace 40 years. Jerubbaal, son of Joash, went back home to live. He had 70 sons of his own, for he had many wives. His concubine, who lived in Shechem, also bore him a son, whom he named Abimelech. Gideon, son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the, how do you pronounce that? Abizrites. No sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. They set up Baal-berith as their god and did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hands of their enemies on every side. They also failed to show kindness to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, for all the good things he had done for them.
Okay. So we got that sense that for 40 years, while Gideon's alive, he's able to hold it all together, and as soon as he dies, it's like he wasn't there at all. Ooh, rough. Mentioned that Gideon had 70 sons. Obviously, polygamy is not something that God loves. He allows it and permits it in the Old Testament, but it's not something, and it's going to have a terrible consequence in the next chapter. It does. It also mentions he has a concubine in Shechem, so he has another girl in another town. Yeah, why? Exactly. It's a bad idea, but if you look at the other areas, it's saying this is my sign of wealth and power that I have all these kids. And unfortunately, there's still people in this day and age who thinks that their goal in life is to have as many babies with as many people as they can, and that's somehow, not the goal. Not at all. Not what God wants you to do. So, Gideon makes it more poor choices here. The name Abimelech, because we're going to talk a whole chapter about Abimelech, an often forgotten part of Judges, means my father is the king. Wait a minute. Didn't Gideon say he didn't want to be king? And he called his name Abimelech. So Gideon named him, my father is the king. Maybe there's a mixed message there. Maybe not a good choice. Maybe he's saying something to this kid. And Abimelech is something that if we look in the back of Genesis, we actually have pagan kings in the land of Canaan. who call themselves Abimelech. You know, so this is an old title that predates this here. And so it's a callback almost to that Canaanite lifestyle. But we'll talk more about that when we talk more about Abimelech. So, don't like that at all. Anyway, he dies at a good old age. He's buried. The people forget. They set up Baal and Baal-berith, which is Baal of the covenant again. So they're setting that all up. And remember, the first thing that Gideon does is he takes down a statue of Baal and destroys it. And as soon as he's gone, they put it right back up. I don't know. Didn't have the legacy he should have had. So yeah. All right. Any questions on the death of Gideon? Okay, let's get to Abimelech. I'm really excited about Abimelech. Okay, who here remember that Abimelech was in the book of Judges? Okay, no one's brave enough to raise their hand. But this is something that's often overlooked because it's kind of a weird chapter because Abimelech himself is not a judge. But it's more just sort of saying what happens after Gideon's lifetime, following one of his sons, the son of his concubine, and the terrible, terrible things that he does. So it's not a happy chapter, just letting you know that from the thing. But yeah, it's often kind of forgotten. Sometimes he is included in the list of judges. He shouldn't be. He is never called a judge. But he is definitely odd. Let's hear what happens here to him. I'm going to read the first 2 verses, then we'll talk. Now Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem, to his mother's relatives, and said to them, and the whole clan of his mother's family, "Sing in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 sons of Jerubbaal rule over you, or that one rule over you? Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh." So these will be his mother's family and tribe that he's going to say, would it be better if I was in charge instead of the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, who I like to call Gideon because it's way easier to say. You know, and he's going down to Shechem. Now the interesting thing about Shechem here is Shechem is an old city. If you go back to the book of Genesis, Shechem is a city there, and that's actually where you have the incident with Dinah that happens at Shechem. I'll walk over here now. The other thing is archaeologically, they say from this time period, it's very obvious that the Canaanite people are still living with the people of Israel. So this is a region where there's sort of a mixture between the Canaanite practices and the Israelite practices at Shechem. This is a problem. And so what happens is they're not really loyal to the rest of the thing. They're not identified even as the tribe of Manasseh. They're just like, we're Shechem. We're our own independent thing, where we're doing our own thing. So yeah, they're not really tied into anything else there. When it says that the people have no love for the sons of Gideon, well, we'll see that in a second here. So that's what's going on right here at Shechem. All right, so he starts this whispered campaign saying, shouldn't I be in charge? Yeah, maybe it sounds good to them. All right, let's go ahead and hear what happens next. Verses 3 through 6, and be warned, there are difficult words in here.
And his mother's relatives spoke of all these words on his behalf in the hearing of all the leaders of Shechem. And they were inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is our relative. They gave him 70 pieces of silver from the house of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows, and they followed him. Then he went to his father's house at Ophrah, and killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself. All the men of Shechem and all Beth Millo assembled together, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar which was in Shechem.
All right, so in some ways, some people say this is the true first king of Israel. I would say they're wrong. Saul still deserves the title of first king of Israel because Abimelech isn't king of all of Israel. He's king of Shechem in any place he can boldly around him. So he doesn't deserve this title. The second thing is, it says, so he convinces the people of Shechem, they take the offerings given to Baal-berith, because hey, Baal doesn't need them, he's not a real thing. And they give them, and he hires worthless and reckless fellows. I love that translation. You know, it gives you the exact idea of what kind of character he's surrounding himself with. Thugs. The worst of the worst. And so he goes and he kills all of his brothers who must have been gathered together. Maybe there's a festival of some sort that brought them all together. Kills them all on one stone, which sounds to me like human sacrifice. So an ugly sort of thing. And one guy escapes from all of this. And so you get this sense that Abimelech was somehow separated from all the rest of his brothers. As it mentions, he was the son of a concubine in Shechem, which sounds to me like, despite the fact Gideon obviously had multiple wives in his hometown, if he traveled to Shechem, he needed a girl on the side, so he said, oh, you're my concubine. There, makes it legit. Yeah, this is problematic. And another sort of example of polygamy going horribly wrong for a family when it happens. And I'd say every single Old Testament example of polygamy, you see strife develops in the family because of polygamy. The most famous example being Joseph and his brothers. Israel has children through 4 different wives, and they sell one of the brothers into slavery. It's not a good thing. Other bad things happen as well. If you look at 1 Samuel, that's where you have Hannah and Peninnah. And Peninnah makes Hannah's life bitter for her. The 2 wives of Moses? I forgot his name. Manoah. It's Manoah, that's it. Got it right. Third try. Anyway, so we see this again and again. Solomon, he has all those wives and they lead him into idolatry. You look at David, he has kids through multiple wives and his kids end up killing each other. This is how it goes. So Abimelech does what would be the common practice time. He wants to be king. He kills all of the people who would be contending with him for the throne. Therefore, there's no challengers. Therefore, he wins by default. And they set him up in Shechem as king. Now, we heard that one of them escaped. And we're going to hear what he does in this next part here. And he has a long section here where he talks about, it's verse 7 through 21. We're going to read the first section, verses 7 through 15, because this, 7 through 15, is the first parable in the Bible. Yeah, I know, we finally got a parable. It only took us to the book of Judges. We're 7 books in, haven't had a parable. Here it is, we got a parable finally. And it's not well known at all, so this is very exciting as well. So, first parable of the Bible, said by Jotham, son of Gideon, and he's yelling it from a mountaintop. I wonder what this parable is. So let's read this parable and see what it has to do. Volunteer to read. Someone who likes the parables of Jesus. All right, see Dorcas has her hands up.
All right.
Who did?
Dorcas.
Dorcas.
Oh, and it says Mount Gerizim, which is this yellow writing right next to Shechem. So, same region right here.
He cried at the top of his voice, "Listen to me, you citizens of Shechem, and may God listen to you. Once upon a time the trees came to anoint a king, and they said to the olive tree, 'Be king over us.' But the olive tree answered, 'What? Leave my rich oil by which gods and men are honored to come and hold sway over the trees?' So the trees said to the fig tree, 'Then will you come and be king over us?' But the fig tree answered, 'What? Leave my good fruit and all its sweetness to come and hold sway over the trees?' So the trees said to the vine, 'Then will you come and be king over us?' But the vine answered, 'What? Leave my new wine, which gladdens gods and men, to come and hold sway over the trees?' Then all the trees said to the thorn bush, 'Will you then be king over us?' And the thorn said to the trees, 'If you really mean to anoint me as your king, then come under the protection of my shadow. If not, fire shall come out of the thorn and burn up the cedars of Lebanon.'"
All right, so there's the parable here. Ooh, that's fun. So it has to do with trees here. And so we have 3 trees that are all asked to rule over the other trees. The first one is the olive tree. And why does the olive tree refuse? Because it's busy making olive oil and olives. Olive oil is incredibly versatile, as anyone knows who cooks or bakes. You can use it for many different things. You can burn it to light lamps in this area. So the olive tree is a very valuable tree. And it says, Now, should I really stop producing olives so I can rule over you? As I said last week, this has a bit of a libertarian bent to it, doesn't it? You know, why should I go into government? I'm busy actually doing things. Love this, love this. Anyway, next we have the fig tree. And the fig tree, it's the same thing. Should I stop producing figs? Now, obviously, figs isn't something we eat common outside of Fig Newtons. I think that's the only food I can think of where I actually eat figs. Fig pudding? I've heard it, but have you ever eaten figgy pudding? No, I've never eaten it. I'm not saying I want to. I'm just saying it's like I know Fig Newtons. But figs were a big deal in this thing. This is the fruit of choice. And again, should I stop making figs to run things? Then it goes to the vine. Now to us, we're like, that's a vine, not a tree. The people of Israel don't care. A tree is something that grows stuff. They're going to call that a tree. So I know I sometimes get that people were like, that's not a tree, that's a bush. I'm like, it's tall and it's green, it's a tree, okay? I'm still in the Old Testament. Anyway, so what happens is the vine is then asked, and the vine produces grapes, and it also refuses. So who do they go to? The most worthless of all, the bramble or the thorn bush. And in this parable, who is the bramble or the thorn bush? Who does that represent? Abimelech is the bramble. So they're saying, so you went to this thorn bush and asked them to rule. And think of Jotham. He's saying, you know, we had these great men in the thing, and they've all been killed. All my brothers, my 70 brothers, they were like the olive tree. They were like the fig tree. They were like the wine thing. They provided for the people. And instead he put a thorn bush in charge. Man, I like this parable. Anyway, and the bramble said to the trees, if in good faith you are anointing me king over you, then come and take refuge in my shade. How much shade does the thorn bush give? Barely any, and that's the point of this. So take refuge. I'll protect you in my shade. It's like, thorn bush isn't going to do anything for you. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. So predicting that you've made the thorn bush and all that's going to come out of this is destruction for even the greatest of trees, the great cedars of Lebanon. So you've done a terrible thing. You've appointed a wicked and awful and worthless person as king, and now you're going to pay the consequences. That's what this parable is all about. Man. No, it's not good. So then he goes ahead and he explains it. But I want to cover what the parable said before we went into his explanation of it. Because once you understand what that parable means, you're like, man, that is a spicy diss track there, you know, really laying it out on them. You know, you need more, it's exciting for me. So first parable of the Bible, you now know it. It's about trees. All right, any questions before we move on to the next part? All right, verse 16 through 21. Can I have a volunteer to read? All right, Sue is volunteering to read. It's Judges 9, 16 through 21. I heard someone ask what verse, so I am clarifying here.
Okay, 16.
Now therefore, if you acted in good faith and integrity when you made Abimelech king, and if you have dwelt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done to him as his deeds deserve, for my father fought for you, and risked his life, and delivered you from the hand of Midian, and you have risen up against my father's house this day, and have killed his sons, 70 men on one stone, and have made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king over the leaders of Shechem, because he is your relative. If you then have acted in good faith and integrity with Jerubbaal and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come out from Abimelech, and devour the leaders of Shechem and Beth Milo, and let fire come out from the leaders of Shechem and from Beth Milo, and devour Abimelech. And Jotham ran away and fled, and went to Beer, and lived there, because of Abimelech his brother.
Okay. So, if you have acted in good faith and integrity, have they acted in good faith and integrity? No. And so it's that rhetorical question. I love the persuasiveness of his thing. Have you guys really acted as you should? Absolutely not. Gideon saved all your bacon. What'd you do to him? He killed all of his sons. So it's this laying on of this guilt of burden on them. He's just sort of declaiming to them. I love this. This is great stuff. And he puts out all the ways that they are wrong in this day. And then he says, hey, Shechem, if you've acted in good faith, great, rejoice. But you haven't. Therefore, I hope this. Abimelech destroys you, and you destroy Abimelech. And sure enough, that's what will happen later in this chapter. They're going to start fighting each other pretty soon here. Beth Milo is also mentioned here. That's another city within the region of Shechem. So another sort of local area there. And then the last thing it mentions is he runs away to the place called Beer. Man, that sounds like the best place. Where is this magical place? Is this the Garden of Eden? He went to Beer. Oh man. Okay, joking aside, it's actually another name for Moab, where it's often a place of refuge. David, when he's fleeing from Saul, actually moves his family there to Moab to protect them during that time period here. So Moab is a place of refuge for other people as well. Maybe it was a little more stable. But yeah, ran away to a different country to get away from Abimelech. It's interesting to me he doesn't even go to another tribe. He just gets really far out of the way because he is afraid of Abimelech. Now, if you're Abimelech, yeah, basically the guy has given you a curse, and a curse is as good as a death threat in that culture. He just says, I hope you die, and I hope you kill the people who are following you. So yeah, I mean, he does have reasons to run for his life. A curse like that is a curse, it's a death threat. So yeah, he needs to run for it. Also, Abimelech killed all of his brothers because he thought they were a danger to him. This guy would not be any exception here. It keeps mentioning here that son of the female servant, denoting his lower status as the son of a concubine, not the son of a wife, which gets into the messy family dynamics of having concubines and wives, but a concubine's son would be of lesser status often. Because. Hey, any questions on that? That's the last we hear of Jotham. Pretty good guy. I like that guy. Full good pair. Hey, he's out. Alright, let's move on then, and then if you see here, if you're like my Bible, chapter 9 verses 1 through 21 has the heading Abimelech's conspiracy, and then already we're at the downfall of Abimelech. So that's about the high as it gets there. He gets a pointed cake and it's all downhill from there. So, yes. Let's hear. Oh, and that first part, Abimelech ruled over Israel for 3 years. Yeah, he's a flash in the pan. Let's hear about what's going on here. I'll read the first section, then I'll let someone else read. Abimelech ruled over Israel 3 years. And God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem. And the leaders of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the violence done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come, and their blood be laid on Abimelech, their brother, who killed them, and on the man of Shechem, who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers. And the leaders of Shechem put men in ambush against him on the mountaintops, and they robbed all who passed by them along the way, and it was told to Abimelech. So we have that they immediately start fighting with each other there. It says that God sent an evil spirit. What does that mean to you? Does God command evil spirits? Ooh, it's kind of a bizarre way to say that. How are we to understand this passage when it says that God does something like this? We might even think of other passages where it says like God sent an angel of death. Why do we understand this? This means that the Lord allows Satan and his evil angels to do something. We can think much of the book of Job where Satan wants to do terrible things to Job, and God says, go ahead and allows it. So this is a situation where God is allowing an evil spirit to come between them. He is not protecting Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem. So we see sort of that demonic side to all of this as well. It mentions that they conspired against him by putting ambushes on the mountaintops and robbing people who go through there. What this has to do is Shechem lays on a trade route, and this is not the best map to show this, but Shechem is on a trade route here. And so what happens is the people who are passing through, who would be stopping in Shechem to do business or to pay taxes to the king, before they can get to him, they get robbed by the people of Shechem, and they take the money instead of Abimelech. So that's what this ambush is doing here. So they're robbing Abimelech of what he thinks is rightfully his. So this is a problem here. So, how do you handle this situation here if you're Abimelech? Well, if you're Abimelech, you handle it poorly. Let's find out how poorly he does it. Yeah, he needs to address the situation if he really wants to stay in charge, and he fails to do anything because something bad happens. Let's go verses 26 through 29 here, and hear about another person who enters the fray of this story. Do I have a volunteer to read 26 through 29. In the back, I have marked.
And Gaal the son of Ebed moved into Shechem with his relatives, and the leaders of Shechem put confidence in him. And they went out into the field and gathered the grapes from their vineyards, and trod them, and held a festival. And they went into the house of their God, and ate and drank, and reviled Abimelech. And Gaal the son of Ebed said, Who is Abimelech? And who are we of Shechem, that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal? And is he not Zebul? And is not Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. But why should we serve him? Would that his people were under my hand, then I would remove Abimelech. I would say to Abimelech, increase your army, increase your army and come out.
No, I understand, it's very emotional, you're choking up, Abimelech's in trouble now, you feel that? No, I don't feel bad for this guy at all. Okay, so what we have here is this other guy just sort of walks into the story and takes the hearts of the people. So we're not told how many years, but with under 3 years, already someone's moving in who everyone likes better. Guy moves in from out of the area, and they have a big party, and during the party they start bashing their terrible king they just appointed. Man, this sounds so American, doesn't it? You elect a president, you immediately start bashing him. Yeah, this is American. Okay, I love it. But this is more serious. They're not going to vote him out of office. The way you vote a king out of office is with a sword. So this is a serious thing here. And so he's saying, who is this Abimelech guy that we're serving him? We shouldn't be serving him. What is Jerubbaal to us? And then Zebul, I have no clue who Zebul is, but he's obviously somebody they don't like as well. Serve Hamor. So he's saying that he has lineage linking back to Hamor. Hamor is the father of Shechem, who founded the city. So he's saying, hey, I have an older claim to being in charge of this town than this Abimelech character does. You should be following me instead. If these people were under my hand, if I was the one ruling over them, I would say, Abimelech, get your army and let's fight it out and see who wins, because I'm that confident I will win. And so here's a guy who's saying, I can show strength. I'm stronger than Abimelech. You should be following me. Okay, so what's going to happen then? When Zebul, and now we find out who he is, the ruler of the city, so he's ruler in Shechem, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was kindled. He sends messengers to Abimelech secretly saying, Behold, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his relatives have come to Shechem. They're stirring up the city against you. Now therefore, go by night. You and the people are with you. Set an ambush in the field. Then in the morning, as soon as the sun is up, rise early and rush upon the city. And when he and the people who are with him come out against you, you may do to them as your hand finds to do. So, treachery and going on. So the ruler of the city says, he's taken over the city. You're going to hide in the field. When it comes dawn, you're going to rush into the city and catch them unprepared. So the light will be up so they'll be able to see what they're doing in the battle. Fighting during nighttime is a terrible idea. You just end up fighting yourself during this time period. So rush into the city, you'll catch them unprepared, and it'll be a slaughter. That's the plan. Real wholesome stories here. Let's hear what happens. If you have questions, interrupt me, but I'm going to try to get through this section. So Abimelech and all the men who were with him rose up by night and set an ambush against Shechem in 4 companies. And Gaal the son of Ebed went out and stood in the entrance of the gate of the city. And Abimelech and the people who were with him rose from the ambush. And Gaal saw the people who said to Zebul, the traitor, Look, people are coming down from the mountaintops. So he's seeing these people come down the hills in the early dawn or the darkness of late night. And what does Zebul say? You mistake the shadow of the mountains for men. Because you can obviously see that with the sun coming up or just about up, the shadows will be shifting on the mountainside. So he tricks him there. Also remember, these people don't have glasses. If Gaal has bad eyesight or a cataract, he's like, oh, okay, yeah, I trust the guy's got good eyesight. Gaal spoke again. Look, people are coming down from the center of the land, and one company is coming from the direction of the diviner's oak. Then Zebul said to him, Where's your mouth now, you who said, who is Abimelech and who should serve him? Are not these people whom you despise? Go out now and fight with them. So Zabel then lays his hands out because it's too close to stop them and says, you said you're going to go fight them. How'd you go fight them? Let's see what happens to you. And Gaal, true to his word, went out at the head of the leaders of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, he fled before him, and many fell wounded up to the entrance of the gate. And Abimelech lived at Arumah, and Zabel drove out Gaal and his relatives, so they could not dwell in Shechem. So Abimelech wins. I don't think that's cause for cheering. Alright, so he holds off his first challenger here, but things are not over. This is still a mess. Because the people of the city he now rules don't want it. So this cannot end well at all. So let's hear what happens on the following day. Let's hear verses 42 through 45. If I have a volunteer to read. Someone who's already read can read at this point. We've done a lot of reading today. Hey, thank you, Dorcas.
Next day, the people came out into the open, and this was reported to Abimelech. He on his side, took his supporters, divided them into 3 companies, and lay in wait in the open country. And when he saw the people coming out of the city, he rose and attacked them. Abimelech and the company with him advanced rapidly and took up position at the entrance of the city gate, while the other 2 companies advanced against all those who were in the open and struck them down. Abimelech kept up the attack on the city all that day and captured it. He killed the people in it, pulled the city down, and sowed the site with salt. When the occupants of the
That's good.
camp...
We'll stop there for now. So what happens is they made him their king, and just like Jotham said, fires come out from Abimelech and consume them. So they destroy each other in this way. Remember, Abimelech went and hired worthless and useless men, reckless men who don't care about Shechem. Many of them maybe weren't from Shechem, but he's from there. And he goes back and he attacks his own hometown, kills the people, and destroys it. Yikes. It mentions that the people came out. They came out for a battle. So they're like, okay, our leadership just lost the day before. We're going to come out now and we'll fight. They also lose, and they're killed. And then it mentions that he raises the city that's destroying the buildings, and he sows it with salt. That means quite literally he is putting salt into the ground. Why do you put salt into the ground? Because then it won't grow. So he's saying, not only have I destroyed this city, I'm going to make sure that nobody can live here again. That's the idea behind this. Famously from history, that's what the Romans finally do to the city of Carthage, where they fight 3 wars against them. And after the 3rd war, they show up, break down the city, and sow it with salt. So they're like, not again. We're not doing this city again. So, and that's the end of Carthage. So yeah, this is very much a destructive warfare here. This is something where, if we look, and I'm not going to do it now, if we actually look in God's commands to when they are supposed to conquer these things, they're not supposed to destroy the fruit-bearing trees or anything like that, but rather to keep them alive. They're not supposed to do a scorched earth policy of warfare. And yet, that's what Abimelech does. He destroys even the land itself in his wake. Okay. However, there are some survivors, and they're in what's called the Tower of Shechem. So this would have been a fortified tower that they could have held up, and so likely a place of retreat within the city. Now, this tower likely isn't large, and as we'll see, there's about 1,000 people in it, so imagine a small tower packed to the gills, but it's the safest spot to go. Let's hear what happens at the Tower of Shechem next. Dorcas, do you mind reading again?
When the occupants of the castle of Shechem heard this, they went into the great hall of the temple of El-Bereth. It was reported to Abimelech that all the occupants of the castle of Shechem had collected together. So he and his people went up Mount Zalmon carrying axes. There he cut brushwood and took it and hoisted it on his shoulder. He said to the men, "You see what I am doing. Be quick and do the same." So each man cut brushwood, Then they followed Abimelech and laid the brushwood against the hall and burnt it over their heads. Thus all the occupants of the castle of Shechem died, about 1,000 men and women.
Okay. If your translation uses castle, I'm going to disagree with that translation because there's no castles at this time period. Tower is a better translation here. It's a very simple defensive structure. So my criticism there, because castles are, they won't be castles for like 2,000 years. Anyway, secondly, how is he defeating this Tower of Shechem? He uses fire, so surrounds the place with fire. Two thoughts on how this tower is defeated. Either it's just everyone died from the smoke and the heat who's inside the tower. The other thought is you can, in that era, if you get the brick and mortar hot enough, you can cause it to crack and crumble in that way as well. So it's not clear how he does this, but it's a nasty massacre. The people are retreating, he continues his attack and just kills more people. Okay, I do want to finish Abimelech because I can't take 2 weeks of this guy. Then Abimelech went up to Thebez and encamped against Thebez and captured it. This is another city. It's unclear where it is, but there's a site that might be about 9 miles from Shechem to the northeast that some people think it is. But there was a strong tower within the city. So imagine that you have the town, it's spread out, might not even have walls, and it's got grasslands and farmlands, but inside's a tower where everyone retreats to in the day of danger. And all the men and women and all the leaders of the city fled to it and shut themselves in, and they went up to the roof of the tower. And Abimelech came to the tower forth against it, and draw near to the door of the tower to burn it with fire, because fire worked well last time. And a certain woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull.
A woman?
Yes, a woman does it. So this is the dishonor that's given to him, and yes, Judges has shown you that women are the only ones who successfully defeat tyrants. Yes. But it says that the upper millstone, so if you're thinking of a millstone here, you have a big stone that's on the ground, and then you have a second one, and this is going to be poorly drawn here, that would be up here to help roll the stone along. So it's this stone here. It would be the smaller of the two stones. And the millstone, I have this in my notes here. How heavy does it say it was? Where did I put this? Yeah, it says it was about 1.5 feet wide, 3 to 5 inches thick, either circular or low shaped, and milling was considered women's work. So this is a lot like jail using a tent peg. You'd use to set up your tent. She says, "Oh, I just came from the mill," and whoop, it works just fine here. This actually gets mentioned in the book of Samuel, this infamous defeat of Abimelech by a woman who throws a rod, because Joab actually leads his forces against the wall of the city and loses, and David writes him a nasty letter saying, "Don't you remember what happened to Abimelech? You want that to happen to my troops, you idiot?" So yeah, this is infamous for being a super dumb decision. There's a tower with people above you, and this woman just drops a rock on him. So yeah, he's defeated at that time. He's not dead yet. Then he called quickly to the young man, his armor bearer. So in this day and age, if you're a fighting man, you'd likely have a second person who's carrying your equipment around with you, because if you're going to fight, you can't carry your equipment and then fight, so you have somebody who's helping maintain all your gear. Calls his armor bearer, says, "Draw your sword and kill me, lest they say a woman killed him." And the young man thrust him through, and he died. It didn't fool anyone, it didn't work, everyone knows a woman killed him. And the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, everyone departed to his home. God returned the evil of Abimelech, which he committed against his father in killing his 70 brothers. And God also made all the evil men of Shechem return on their heads. And upon them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Gideon. And that's the end of it. And then we move on to other judges here. Now, how do we understand this? This is really something where Abimelech is tied to Gideon as the legacy of Gideon. The fact that he sets himself up as, he has these messy family dynamics, and he doesn't take care of the idolatry. So he leaves this open for this Abimelech thing to happen here through many of his things. I get the feeling he wasn't a good dad either to this kid. Not really.
How could he even keep track?
I would also say this is another warning against how would he even keep track. I have people ask me that about 5. I don't know. And I remember like 4 of their names, so.
That's 80%.
Yeah, that's 80% right, yeah. That's stable. No, that's, I feel really bad when I'm like, Tom, you, Tom. I actually say Tom for all the kids, because that's the name I say the most. He's the best. Yeah, he's great. It's his birthday today, and last night, he was puking. I think he ate something that didn't agree with him, so he's probably going to miss his whole birthday today. It's really sad. Anyway, poor guy. But what this is also danger about is that it's mixing, because at Shechem, they're mixing worship of Baal with the true God. Gideon's snares also, has that ephod and a worship of the true God. And it doesn't hold. You can't serve God, the true God, and a false God at the same time. It ends up giving you just end up like the people around you. So I'd say there's also a big danger of that, and I'd say that's true throughout the entire book of Judges. It's saying these are the results of not driving out the people ahead of you, and instead letting those who worship false gods live with you, marry with you, and rule with you. You end up just becoming as barbaric and awful as the people around you. So yeah, that's kind of the legacy of Gideon. It's tough. Now, I have 4 minutes. That being said about all this, Gideon is one of the heroes of faith. And I don't want to take that away from him. I think there's many good things where we can look at Gideon and say he is an example of how to be faithful to God. Despite the fact he's afraid, he still does what God wants him to do. There's the time where he deals with the tribe of Ephraim and he speaks gently with them and disarms them instead of fighting them, as we're going to see another judge fails at miserably when that comes upon him. And Gideon does hold the peace for 40 years during his land. But it's also a warning of caution that we should not, if we are in a secure place, start compromising our belief in God. As so many of those we see in the Bible do, where God sets them up and everything's going well, and then they falter. They have those pitfalls. They have those sins that they can't get rid of. So we too should also be diligent for those sort of worries about ourselves. Also, make sure we're raising up the next generation well, because we don't need Abimelechs following our legacies. So I think that's an important thing. So if you happen to have the name Gideon, make sure you don't name your kid Abimelech. Any last questions or thoughts on today on Abimelech and Gideon? Yes, please.
Well, I see him as a busy bee pollinating a lot of flowers. I mean, to, that amount of children, how would you know their names, their birthdays, who's who? That's interesting. It says, yeah, he was like a rolling stone. Wherever he laid his hat was his home.
Yeah, and it's not a point of praise. That is better said. All right. Well, that thought, let's close with prayer. Dear Lord God, we'd ask that you would indeed keep us from sin and false gods and idols and things that lead us astray from you. May we serve you with faith and with courage. This we pray in your name. Amen.